I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back to the UFC. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he went back to Bellator either, because him and Scott Coker never had a falling out. He had a falling out with like the overall Viacom and the old regime that used to run it with Bjorn. He had a problem with them. He didn't have a problem with Scott. Scott actually is the one that brought him to the table and said, hey, like if you're uncomfortable and you're not, not really happy with what's going on here, as I'm taking over, he's like, we can go ahead and release you, and let you go. And he's like, okay, look, I'm going to go now while I can. And so he went. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back, because there is that talk of that tournament, but there's going to be killers in there, man, in that tournament. Tofik Mosaev, Alexander Shabli, and Usman Nurmagomedov, along with Sidney Outlaw in the wrestling, the grappling. And you've got those fights that are there. I'd love to see him and, Benson Henderson and Eddie Alvarez fight. I'd love to see those fights happen. And there's a chance to win a lot of money in that. And obviously they're going to pay him pretty well to come back, being the former champion. It would make sense. It really would make sense for him to come back and have a shot there at that $1 million plus whatever they pay him. Now, if he goes off to the UFC, I ain't mad at that either, because I'd like to see him and Michael Chandler run it back. I want to see that fight again. So there's conversation to be had there. So there's some fun fights for him in that division as well. Him and Gaethje, again, him and Dustin again, Chandler again. I mean, there's a mix up in there. Connor's gone. Khabib's gone. There's fights to be had there. So, we had had Eddie on. We had talked to Eddie, and when we were talking about him and his activity in one, and you could just tell that, nothing that he said, but you could just tell that it wasn't the place that he felt. Never felt like home. I don't think it ever felt like home. I think he really tried to make it work. Huh?
Cash grab.
I think, yeah, of course it was a big cash grab, but it was, I don't think it ever felt like home. I don't think he's been fighting in a cage, and sure, he's trained in a ring, fought in a ring, but it's just different. It's different fighting over there. I've worked over there for one, doing cage side commentary for them. He is, it sometimes when you go there, you've got to make it feel like home, but if you're not there often enough, which it's hard. They don't have a lot of shows. Maybe now they will. They're on Amazon Prime. But if you're coming from the States, or you're coming from Canada, or you're coming from, Brazil, Mexico, whatever, it's hard if you're not there, if you're not on every single card. And they don't have a lot of cards. So it never really feels like home. The UFC and Bellator, they're having 30 shows, 24, 30 shows a year. And UFC's having 50 shows a year. It's easy to get, on cards. It's easy to get on these cards, and you're fighting every 2 to 3 months. Like Dana's said multiple times, I have to offer you 3 fights a year per your contract. So if you want to fight, you can fight 3 times a year. Well, Bellator is pretty much the same way. You can fight almost 3 times a year as long as you're ready to go every time they give you the call. Same thing with the UFC. One is not always that way. And so for Eddie, if you're only fighting once a year, it's hard to get into a rhythm and become successful. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. He is towards the end of his career. He knows that. And where does he go? Does he go to Bellator, to come back and try to get another cash grab? Or does he go back to the UFC and try to square up, for the Chandler fight, for the Dustin Poirier fight, and potentially another Justin Gaethje fight, to go out on top in terms of those 3 fights. So there's some fights to be had in there. So there's some fun fights all the way around. We'll see where he ends up, but I wish him nothing but the best, man. He's one of my favorite fighters of all time. Go to mybookie.ag, use that promo code WAYNEIN, and they'll give you additional spending cash with your first initial deposit.
100% agree. Look,